I'm Lee Brain, work in the investment bank CTO office in Barclays, work on technology architecture in the investment bank, and that's been my background in technology delivery and banking for about 25 years. In the last year or so, I've got much more involved in the potential for shared ledgers and in particular smart contracts. I've been involved with nurturing and curating those ideas as they progress and evolve in the bank. And as you probably know, Barclays involved many initiatives in the blockchain-related space, ranging from our accelerator, where we're accelerating startups through the process, engagement with the major financial market infrastructure firms, and also a whole range of use cases where we give feedback to the industry, including, for example, via trade associations. So I'll leave the other panelists to introduce themselves and also what interests you about the blockchain space.
Hi, I'm Jane Thomason. I work for Apt Associates, which is a company that works in 40 countries worldwide, implementing programs to support governments to enable the poor to be more empowered, to have better health and education services, and essentially deliver better services to the poor. So what my interest is trying to understand how the blockchain solutions that are being developed largely for developed countries can be applied to solve real-world problems in emerging economies. So there's a group of us who've come from Apt Associates with our friends from the Bank of Papua New Guinea, and we're hunting solutions that we can take back and test and trial in the field to see if we can actually find something that could be transformative for the lives of the poor.
Thank you.
So my name is Alex Bausch. I'm a co-chair of the Blockchain Ecosystem Network. I've been in infrastructure, telecoms, and security for the better part of 25, 30 years. In the last 15 years, I was in the last revolution, which was the mobility revolution, BlackBerry, iPhone, smartphones. And in the last 2-3 years, I was particularly interested in mobile banking. So I worked with some of the largest technology firms to really push forward mobile banking and work with AFI, on financial inclusion. And I found blockchain the next logical step. This is one of those foundational technologies that you want to be in with. And what struck me is that all the events, all the gatherings are very technical in nature. It's hackathons, it's developers, and they are of course a little bit libertarian, Bitcoin. But I think we're getting to a point where we need to show the value, to the business. How are we going to use this technology? How is this going to have impact on our business, on society as a whole? Hence the creation of Blockchain Ecosystem Network, where we want to really focus on the use cases. And of course, technology is important, but more important is the ecosystem. So that's why I'm here.
And I'm Luis. Some of you guys have been receiving my spam about the event. So I run events, but around the world. So we run them in a lot of countries. So part of what I get to do is I get to see the different nuances in various cities, whether it's DC, Hong Kong, San Francisco, Dublin, because we run, at least 8 or 10 of these, sometimes smaller, obviously, per year. But I also have a vested interest because I have a small stake in Tallysticks and Applied Blockchain as well. So I work with those guys, and I'm a mentor at with a couple VC firms. My background is kind of eclectic. I have a master's in brand management. I also do a little bit of design. So you can blame me for the clashing 70s color and logo and all that sort of stuff.
That was you, huh?
That was me. I was, and that kind of leads to my next point. For some of you that read the book, some people describe that blockchain is like the internet in the early 90s, and the reason why we did the whole 70s thing in the book and in the pattern is because I believe that it's more like technology in the 70s and early 80s. It's way earlier than it feels like, but it's going to move a lot faster once it starts, and I think that's the key. We're really early, but once it starts, it's going to move exponentially fast, and I feel like I have a front row seat, literally.
Okay, I have a few topics to run through. The theme of this session is very much on blockchain in the future, what's going to be happening. So as I run through, some will be business related, some will be technology related, so feel free to dip in with your answers, not to all the questions, but just as you think. So my first one's a bit of a toughie. As we know, there are many different distributed ledger platforms out there. Some examples include Corda, Hyperledger Fabric, Ethereum, digital asset platform, etc., etc. Are we going to have a load of different platforms that can't interoperate, or do we need them to interoperate? If so, how do we think that's going to happen? So, anybody would like to pick up, is that important? How do you see it progressing?
So we missed the real technical specialist on this board. He didn't show up. But if you want to compare this to TCP/IP in the early 90s, remember that I was fortunate enough to have gone to school at University of San Diego, and so I started using TCP/IP in the 80s. And then my dad said in 92, so yeah, you really should do something about internet and intranet. And I said, yeah, but Dad, I've been using all these protocols all this time. And same goes for blockchain, right? So what happened to intranets? Remember in the early days of internet, we want, oh no, we need to have it closed down. We can't have our Novell network on the internet, it needs to be closed. And the same goes for blockchain. So we have closed blockchain networks, we have different standards, we have, but I think in the end, it will all be one protocol. So for now, for the adoption, it's key because companies and societies as a whole are not going to accept vendor lock-in. So to that end, we will need interoperability. And
the way I describe it is that there's two types of things happening, and there's probably a third that's coming. You have people building cars or trains, and you have people building rails. And right now you have different gauge rails, different size cars, and the trains and the cars are the apps, let's say, and the rails are the platforms that they run on. And you have all these things that don't connect, don't work together. Oh, there we go. We have our technical expert here. So we started a little bit early, and we didn't send you the memo, but somehow you made it anyway.
Just only 5 minutes late.
Yeah.
So,
he was on a different blockchain. So.
Yeah, that's it. So the point is that you have all these things that are there and nobody's building to the same standard. And I don't think you need to build to the same standard. I think you need, because it's digital, I think a layer could solve that. And that's like the TCP/IP layer. So you can keep building, but as soon as you get that steady layer, I think that's the reason why I think it's exponential, is because that's what you need to develop an apps ecosystem. And you saw what happens when an apps ecosystem launches. It goes from 0 in 2008 to 30 billion industry today, but that's going to happen in more like 2-3 years once we get that layer or the interoperability.
It's like VHS and Betamax.
Could you introduce yourself to the audience?
yes, of course. My name's Nick Johnson. I'm a software engineer for the Ethereum Foundation, working on the core Go team, also working on some of our other efforts such as ENS, the Ethereum name service.
Any key thoughts on interoperability? We were just discussing the importance, and what would you like to see in the future? What do you think will happen?
I think the other panelists are correct that a lot of it is going to come down to not everyone necessarily using the same blockchain, but better interoperability support in existing technologies. So I think what's going to be critical is blockchains, as they get developed, building in features that are designed to support easy proving of, making proofs from other blockchains and so forth, so that you can rely on data you get from elsewhere.
Okay, thanks. Next question. So we have Jane here. So if we're looking at financial inclusion and how blockchain may support that, whether it be in developing countries or maybe even the underbanked in developed countries, what specific opportunities do you see that blockchain could help with?
Look, I'm a bit of a blockchain baby, and I've spent 3 days learning and listening to people, but I want to share with you a story about what my vision for what blockchain could be is. Because when I first heard about blockchain, I thought back to the Banda Aceh tsunami, and we worked in Banda Aceh after the 2014 Boxing Day tsunami. And aside from the terrible loss of life that everyone read about there, everything was gone. There were no land records, there were no bank records. No one knew who was alive and who was dead. No one knew who the people were. Donors flocked to Banda Aceh and it was chaos, and no one knew if their money was getting to the people that it was really designed to serve. And when I heard about blockchain, I thought, my goodness, even though still those people would have died, they would have had land records in the blockchain. They would have had people's bank accounts on the blockchain. They would have had people's identities on the blockchain. They would have had smart contracts to pass money down to the recipients that the money was intended for. So for me, there are so many opportunities in developing countries, whether it's in a humanitarian disaster or whether it's for financial inclusion, finding ways to reach those billions of people who are currently unbanked, who can't register their assets so that they can borrow money, whether it's a cow or whether it's a block of land that's unregistered. So the way I see it, if we can actually harness the potential of blockchain, and I don't know if we can, then it really has tremendous potential to transform the lives of millions of people around the world.
Okay, thank you. Any other thoughts there, whether it be from a technology aspect, looking at financial inclusion?
So in the last 2 years, I was fortunate enough to be working with Infosys. I think Infosys people are in the room, so if so, put your hand up. And as you know, Infosys is one of the biggest core banking software vendors in the world. And so I had the good fortune of being able to present to our Queen Maxima, who is also very much involved with United Nations Special Envoy on financial inclusion. And so what Infosys are doing in India is onboarding 500 million unbanked to give them a bank account so they can transact. And we heard Chris Skinner talk about it this morning. And the mobile vendors, Samsung, they are interested in doing this, because if you want to onboard unbanked and they have to walk 24 hours to get to the nearest post station, that doesn't work. So give them a smartphone. So those are real applications that work. And with blockchain, we can support that. But it's not only that. If you look at how in Africa, a company like Farm Access is providing healthcare and free medicine to AIDS patients in Africa. You give them a healthcare wallet, and they get tokens to pay for the med. You have a company like Oiko Credit who give peer-to-peer payments, microcredit financing. Give them tokens, and it could speed up the whole process. For every pound, every euro donated here, in the end, only 60% gets to the target. And you could speed that up.
Sure. Okay, I'm going to jump topics now quite abruptly. Digital currencies. So we all know the invention of Bitcoin about 8 years ago, and that there's a thread there running of virtual currencies. Hundreds of them exist. In parallel with that, in recent years, there's been research and quite a few research publications, involvements of central banks as well, including the sponsorship of some of that research for central bank issued digital currencies. Just wondering, what are people's thoughts looking to the future, 3, 5, 10 years from now? Do you see central bank issued digital currencies like a GBP coin or a Fed coin, as people call them, dominating, or do you see them coexisting with virtual currencies? Any thoughts?
Well, I think at the hackathon this weekend, Ishko, I don't know if he's still here, but he came up with a pretty novel concept, and it's basically almost like a fit-for-purpose currency that could be adopted by a central bank. And basically, if it's controlled centrally, I know this goes against the decentralization, but if it's controlled centrally and you can deploy the funds for a specific purpose, and it's only used for that specific purpose, that's a fit-for-purpose type coin or currency But one of the features that he built into his program is the ability to recall and reallocate if it's not used appropriately. So having that central control, and I know it goes against what Bitcoin was made for, but this isn't that. This is something that's actually slightly better. If you give aid to a farmer to get fertilizer, and it's winter season and you no longer need fertilizer and he never used it, the ability to recall that and use it for winter aid of some sort is powerful. And I think, you know, it's less about the currency and more about shifting value around and having central control. So I think you're going to start to see novel uses of value tokens that are, you know, that sort of bend the rules for, but are useful for a purpose.
I don't think we're going to see fiat currencies in the traditional banking system just vanish anytime soon. I'm fairly certain that large organisations will be releasing fiat coins. I don't know whether we'll see central banks themselves issuing them. If we do, I wouldn't be surprised if it was either done on a private blockchain or done as a sort of a large-scale issuance, so you know, that they issue currency and it's held by central banks, but the retail banking all continues to use the traditional financial system. Certainly it has big advantages in terms of transparency and so forth. If you record all of the issuance of your national currency on the blockchain, you can determine exactly how much is being issued. You can determine whether the budget you know, published by the government actually reflects the actual transfer of funds. So it has some big advantages in terms of transparency and in terms of making it easier to tell that your government is acting in your best interests.
Sure. So we talked about the different platforms earlier. Let's also talk now about ecosystems around those platforms. So how important do you think it will be that the ecosystems build rapidly? How important to the success? And what types of components of the ecosystems are important to that success?
Oh, you're looking at me, huh?
Indeed.
Yeah. So, first of all, you know, we had, throughout the day, we did hear several people talk about ecosystems, right? And this is all great technology, and if it's foundational technology, it will take, we all agreed, I mean, we did hear it today, it will take a lot of time for adoption. And that adoption is not so much because of great technology, you know, I don't think. There's a lot of barriers that need to be taken down, and those barriers have to do with law, have to do with how companies are organized, you know, how in a specific vertical. We did hear, you know, from the Port of Rotterdam, you know, how logistics are using or want to use blockchain. Well, you know, just in the logistics chain, you know, you have Maersk, you have the port, you have the terminal, you have all these people who need to play. Yeah, and that's not even want to think about the laws. So if in a specific vertical you want blockchain technology to work, you need to first have the ecosystem in place. And if you want to make that comparison to TCP/IP in the early 90s, it was pretty much the same what happened there. And so it can take quite some time before that adoption really takes place. So, and there was a good piece on Harvard Business Review over Christmas, and I could really recommend it. It's a free download. And I think Chris Skinner also used a little a picture from it. And that basically stated, you know, foundational technology like blockchain, you know, the rate of adoption is really determined by the ecosystem, you know.
So do you think there are any components missing from the ecosystem that need to be built? If they're in place, that will accelerate adoption.
I think a mandate, because, you know, there's that whole story about Jeff Bezos doing a mandate on using APIs inside of Amazon, and if you don't like it, if you don't like providing services to everyone else over the web, then go find a new job. That mandate changed Amazon and forced them to be a cloud company, a security company, and then they were the cloud company and with the most data mined ever. And I think, imagine if, let's say, we're the central government over here, and you guys are all utility companies, banks, all kinds of players vested in the space. If we had a mandate to say it's the 2025 mandate that you all have to be sharing services at the government with each other, and it's a mandate from the government level, I think the ecosystem would be forced to form, and the services would be forced to form, the players would come together, and any other way of doing the ecosystem, there's too many egos and people fighting for supremacy in the ecosystem. So I think it needs that government level mandate. Without that, it's going to happen organically, but it is going to get ugly before it gets good.
Okay, so taking that idea to the next step, what other related things, so whether it be policies, attitudes, or similar, would help adoption? So if we start with, for example, inclusion, and then expand maybe to include financial services after that.
Well, I guess I'd like to, I'm glad I'm sitting next to the ecosystem guy, because I'd like to kind of throw out a challenge, because one of the things that has become apparent to me over the last few days being here is that there isn't an ecosystem that deals with what we're interested in that this seems to be something of an ecosystem here, which is around looking at adoption of blockchain technologies largely for sort of Western markets and to some extent from emerging markets from a business point of view, but from a point of view of how blockchain can be used to solve the intractable problems of poverty, it seems to me that there's a whole nother world of people out there who are not connected with this world of people who might be able to help us with the transformative technologies. So I'd actually say we need to somehow connect these ecosystems and create a new one that takes that topic on straight down the line.
And who could you imagine supporting those connections? Do you see that as a role of government, a role of existing institutions, or fintech?
Well, jolly good that you should ask that. For a start, we've just set up a LinkedIn group, and I hope you'll all join it. And it's called Blockchain Solutions for the Poor. Go put your name on it. I've got no idea is the answer, but I'm going to figure it out, and if you all join me, we'll be able to do that.
But Jane, can I invite you to set up a Beacon chapter just on that subject? I mean, we have several verticals, but this seems to be one that is really, interesting.
Oh, no, I was going to get you after this meeting now I've discovered you exist.
Well, there we go. Let me
pleasure.
give you my business card, so there you go. And we'll make your steering wheel, There you go. You should see that tall guy, he did it all, so...
This is how the magic happens. But I think, groups like Beacon that are bringing people together. I think forums. I think the Ethereum core developers, like getting everybody together on a regular basis and having an underlying community will make life a lot easier. And I know there's various consortiums and that sort of thing, but I think. Just like we were talking about the rails and the carts, they all have to come together at some point and agree, or else, everyone is sort of fighting for the same goal, but, fighting with each other when really, there's a bit of a utopian hippie, element to this that, would be wonderful to see, but, I doubt it will happen. But I think getting organizations like Beacon, creating chapters, that sort of thing. I think that's the beginning. You need an inclusive organization that allows for chapters to grow and have that network effect. So, I'd like to see where it goes.
Yeah, so on that note, for instance, in music, we had Panos Panay here, and the Beacon for Music, he really leads that chapter. But at the same time, this is a world that's on fire, and you see this, that the way we are organized, nation states, so every nation seems to have their own blockchain initiatives. In the Netherlands, we're fortunate that government is really investing in all types of use cases. Here in the city of London, it's fintech. I know that in Sweden, Agneta is there. We have a specific verticals there as well. And we could all learn from each other. So what this ecosystem thinking is all about is bring it together, inspire, inform, and innovate. So we heard Mark Dowd talk about that. So that's what an ecosystem should be.
Okay, so on the topics of inspiring and informing, my next question is delving into a little bit of detail. It's what do we put on ledgers? And what are we intending to put on as the years go by? So to date, when you look at many of the proof of concepts that banks are performing, they're just simulations. Effectively, it's a pre-UAT activity. It's really good. It's a learning experience. You can get functional and non-functional learnings from it, and that's great. But then when you look further forward, a year, 2, 3 years from now, You need to think, what is the thing that you're putting on the ledger? Is it, for example, just changes in state, or a hash, which is a pointer to a document? Or is it genuinely your client's books and records? Unlikely in the short and medium term. So my view would be, looking at inspiration and what's practical, what do you see coming up as almost like a roadmap? Do you see any things as the years go by and you say, within 3 years I see the states of certain transactions, and within 10 years maybe some books and records for certain types of things? Do you have any thoughts along those lines?
I think you're spot on talking about hashes and state changes and so on, because there's a natural tendency when somebody says ledger to think about financial transactions, but really the scope is much broader. I'm quite biased because I'm working on it, but I look forward to seeing systems like the ENS, the Ethereum name system, being more widely deployed, and I think we can certainly say that in 2 or 3 years it may not be a direct competitor to the existing internet name system, but it will be providing similar services in similar areas, and I think that's a really good example of a place where a blockchain-based system can add some value that legitimately didn't exist previously. Like previously, there was no way to administer such a system without a central authority, which is how IANA came about in the first place. I think along more financial lines, you'll certainly see more traditional finance transitioning to keeping some records on the blockchain, but I think also just other sorts of assets, and initially in sort of small use cases, as you say, and then expanding out. For example, I was talking to some folks who wanted to record insurance information on the blockchain, not the specific details of an individual client's insurance, but whether they'd obtained it and a hash of the contract and so forth, so that they could protect against things like multiple insurers insuring the same property and so forth. And so I think you'll see a lot of small individual use cases like that gradually building up over time. It's like any ecosystem, it's an iterative process. You build something, somebody builds on that, you build on that, and so on. And the platform and the ecosystem develop in parallel.
I think up until like today, I was kind of naive about what you put into it until I heard a bit about the security panel was talking about. And it's kind of like Facebook. If you put pictures of you drunk, employers are looking at it and having a look. So if you're putting stuff out there publicly, it's going to get out there. And I think with distributed ledgers, if you put things in there and you can write to it and you can't erase it, and security improves in 10 years from now, you have this thing that you put in there 10 years ago that you can't take away, that somebody learned how to decrypt because decryption got better. So be careful with what you put in there, because 10, 20 years from now, if it's sensitive and it gets unlocked, it's almost like a time capsule of the past. So, hashing it is obviously important, but I wouldn't put anything too sensitive. Unless your company's books don't matter in 20 years, then, beware of the future.
And it's also about cost. I'm also fortunate that I'm co-founder of Timeless, and Willie is sitting front row, and he explained one of the use cases where we have visa documents that we put on the blockchain, and really we could put whole videos on the blockchain if you wanted to, but there's also a cost element, right? What if you're going to put 4 gigabyte videos in the blockchain? That's going to be very costly data today. So do you really want that? So a hash is a better solution for now, I think.
And then kind of leading on from that is, could it be the golden source, the actual point of truth? Meaning it's okay to lose the other records because that's the point of truth and it can't conflict with it. So I think some of the use cases you were discussing, it may not be the point of truth for quite a while.
Not the alternative truth, what we heard in the
The
news.
alternative fact, indeed. However, if we're looking at inclusion, I think it's slightly different, because the examples you were given of records being effectively washed away, you would want it to be the point of truth. Is that right?
I think that's right, and I think particularly in settings, if you think about some of the humanitarian relief settings that we have at the moment, where some people have never had an identity, so that's a problem for a start, and some people have lost their identities. So we'd like to see both, that the identities are there and they're the point of truth, but also there are many tens of millions of people around the world who don't have an identity, and we would like to give them the opportunity to have an identity that potentially will give them access to financial services, to health services, education services, and whatever else an identity confers you.
And what about a possibility in the future where an identity may not be you as an individual? It may be something else. For example, in Africa, there's some interesting ideas around the SIM in your phone has the identity. So you curate and nurture your SIM. You may lend your phone to somebody you trust in order to build up, effectively, the credit rating of that SIM. And you can pass that around with others. So I thought that's an interesting idea as well. It kind of breaks the barrier of KYC, for example, in certain countries.
And I think the second Hackathon Challenge winner was actually putting forward a construct like that. And, you know, we're hoping to take his prototype and test it in the field so we can see what that looks like.
Sure. Okay. Next thing is a little bit more of an emotional question. So of this whole space, looking forward to the future, what's the thing that really excites you personally? Not just the company you're working for or the fund you're currently trying to raise some money against or similar, but you personally, what's the brainworm of the idea? So some people, it was, for example, the blockchain underneath Bitcoin. And they looked at it and thought it was interesting, come back to it a few years later, understand a bit more. And you iterate again and again and again, understanding more and more of it. It's an odd type of brainworm that gets in. Any things in this space that appeal to you in a similar way?
Well, I'm going to be a bit vague, really, that the whole technological development in general is what gets me really excited. I think back to the early days of the internet and pioneers like Vint Cerf and so forth, who pioneered some of the original protocols that the internet's still built on, and I try and imagine how they must have felt building this infrastructure that they knew was going to, you know, be really important and really powerful and build something entirely new that the world hadn't seen before. And I like to imagine that when I'm working on this sort of thing, I get that same sort of gestalt that they got back then. So generally it's sort of working on the platform in general is what excites me.
I think it's really lucky if you can be working on something like that as part of a day job. Yeah.
I think I'll go a bit weird, just because. I think right now it's kind of interesting to see the, you know, right now the backbone for what's next isn't there yet, but it's interesting to see, you know, AI, IoT, you know, machine learning, all these things along with blockchain. And once you start to connect all these dots, it can be pretty scary. Like if anybody's ever read anything about, you know, the potential singularity or, you know, one...
Terminator 2, Skynet.
Yeah, so something, you know, of that nature, but not, you know, not you know, it's still with a bit of human intervention. I think there's a lot of potential there in automation, but there's also a lot of threats as well, because it, you know, takes away jobs, there's less people, but you can also solve a lot of those problems of inequality once you start counting the actual number of people and resources that are there. So I think, you know, depending on which hat you're wearing, it can be scary, but on the other end, if you start to combine all these technologies and they start to make processes a lot easier, if we get to a better world where we're more inclusive, I think that's exciting once you start to have better services for all. Scary is that if somebody not so benevolent gets control of it. So I don't know. I'm optimistic, so that's what I'm excited and scared about.
We're working on the Terminator issue.
Okay, good. I am one.
So, yeah, you know, we are we live in very interesting times, to say the least. You know, if you see what's happening around us in the world, you know, this paradigm that we see with blockchain might actually help this society. You know, that's what really excites me, and so that we can make a difference. You know, on the one hand, you know, we seem to have more wealth in the world and more middle class, but somehow we don't feel that here, and I think it's going to get worse. And so what you see in politics and in society, a lot of that is the effect of what we did with technology here in this room. And so what excites me is that this is not just yet another technology fad, like we have with mobility, with AI, with what happened in the last 15 years, This is more fundamental. And so what excites me, that's why I want to be part of this again, is that this whole movement is more than this libertarian movement that started the Bitcoin in 2008. You know, we see people waking up to this, and this is going to shape the new world, where we have those three internets: the Internet of Energy, the Internet of Things, and the Internet of Communications. And you know, something needs to manage this, and that something might very well be this whole ledger technology that we call the blockchain now, and that's why I'm here.
Okay, thanks.
I'm incredibly excited because, as I said, we didn't know what we were going to find. We thought that blockchain technology might be something that had application. We came with our friends from the Central Bank of Papua New Guinea, and I think together we spoke last night and we thought, this is real. We can actually take some of these tools and technologies and we can try them in a real world setting, and then potentially, if we can find some that work, we can scale it. First scale it in PNG and change the lives of people in PNG. But if you can do something in PNG, that's one of the toughest countries in the world, then you can scale it globally. So, you know, I'm excited because I think we here might be launching a global collaboration to change the world, starting in PNG and then moving out from there.
That's great. My final question, and this is really stripping out some of the use cases and instead looking at the technology. When do you think it will be, it's just a good database and messaging, we can use it, deploy it at scale, let's just use it? Do you think we're a year, 2 years? How much longer do you think?
The bad news is blockchains are always going to be less efficient than just good databases that you can use at scale, just by their sheer nature. But we can expect some really big improvements in scalability to the point where the trade-offs are a lot less significant. You don't generally think about the system requirements of running a database to keep your address book now, because that's really not a significant amount of data. Whereas, back in the early 80s, your computer probably had a limit on how many records it could contain. That was pretty hard. And I think blockchain's going through the same sort of evolution now. The data capacity is quite limited now. The storage is comparatively expensive. But with innovations like sharding and so forth, it's going to become much more practical. It's still always going to require consideration as to what things need to be a part of the public record, however. It's very much like keeping a company's sort of main ledgers, in that you don't fill it up with things that are irrelevant to the task that you're trying to achieve. Speaking as a non-accountant, I probably completely messed up that metaphor. But I think in the next couple of years you can expect to see some real improvements in scaling that will make this a lot more practical for a wider range of use cases.
Okay, thanks. Any other thoughts on that topic? I see Lewis reaching for the mic.
I think if you follow the money, I think 2020. I mean, you can look at the money being invested, the players investing in 2.5 years. I think I don't see why we wouldn't have a large-scale, deployable, successful project by then.
Well, for myself, I'm actually pretty optimistic. I think the blockchain-related space has inspired people to come up with distributed ledger solutions and look at sharing of ledgers and also sharing of business logic in the form of smart contracts that multiple parties can run the same logic, so you don't need to reconcile. I think one of the challenges is going to be how to deploy that at scale within the banks so that it meets their functional, non-functional requirements, and then also across the other business domains as well. So I want to give a big thank you to the panel, and many thanks for your crystal ball gazing going forward as well. Thank you.
Thank you.